What if the biggest secret in royal history wasn't hidden behind palace gates, but whispered from Meghan Markle's own lips? What if everything the world believed about her perfect family, her two angelic children, and the fairy tale marriage that captivated millions was nothing more than a performance, and one she now seems desperate to end? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. It began as an ordinary Sunday morning, the kind that feels too calm before chaos strikes. Social media platforms were quiet, tabloids were cycling through their usual royal gossip, and the world thought it had heard every possible scandal about Meghan and Harry. But then, out of nowhere, a message surfaced, a voice note allegedly recorded by Meghan herself, trembling, tearful, and laced with the kind of emotion that can only come from a person who's been carrying a secret for far too long. Within hours, hashtags exploded. Reporters scrambled. The monarchy went into crisis mode. Because in that message, Meghan didn't just confess something shocking. She detonated a truth bomb so massive, it's still echoing across the world. She said the children weren't Harry's. She said Archie and Lilibet, those two innocent faces who have been paraded across magazines and documentaries, were not biologically his. In fact, she said something even darker, something that would leave even her closest allies speechless, that the children were borrowed. Borrowed. The kind of word that doesn't belong in the same sentence as motherhood. But she said it. And the question now haunting everyone's mind is simple. What did she mean? From that moment, the story spread like wildfire. Within minutes, Buckingham Palace was reportedly on lockdown. Phones rang across time zones. Publicists drafted statements they never released. And somewhere, behind the walls of Montecito, Harry was said to be pacing the floor in disbelief, re-listening to the same message again and again, trying to understand how everything he thought he knew about his own family could crumble with just a few words. But how did we get here? How did the woman once hailed as the modern face of the monarchy end up confessing something that could unravel the royal bloodline itself? To answer that, we have to go back to the beginning. Back to the first time Meghan spoke about motherhood, the first time she mentioned her pregnancies, and the first time the world started to whisper that something didn't quite add up. Do you remember those early interviews? The perfectly staged smiles, the carefully worded answers, the way Meghan would place her hand over her stomach in public while Harry looked proudly beside her. It all looked so sincere, so natural. But looking back now, many can't help but notice the inconsistencies. The constantly changing due dates, the absence of official hospital confirmations, the strangely inflated baby bump that appeared to fold as she sat down during one public appearance. Back then, people dismissed it as tabloid nonsense. But now, after this confession, every old video clip is being re-watched, every gesture reinterpreted, and every unanswered question finally being taken seriously. Because if what Meghan has said is true, if those children were indeed borrowed, then this isn't just a royal scandal. It's the unraveling of a global illusion. When the message surfaced, the press immediately went into overdrive. The clip was short, only 37 seconds long, but the emotional weight behind it was staggering. Her voice cracked. She spoke in fragments, as if wrestling between relief and regret. "They're not his, and never were," she whispered. "I didn't mean to lie. I had no choice." Then silence. A kind of haunting silence that made the world stop and wonder. What could possibly drive a mother to say such words? Theories flooded in. Some said it was an outburst, taken out of context. Others claimed it was part of a larger, orchestrated plan, a message meant to manipulate public sympathy. But those who know Meghan, or at least claim to, insist this time it was different. There was something raw, unpolished, and desperate about that voice. It wasn't the carefully rehearsed tone of a media-trained duchess. It was the confession of someone cornered by truth. And that's why this story matters now, because the timing couldn't be more explosive. The royal family is already navigating public exhaustion, fractured trust, and political scrutiny. Netflix has reportedly grown cold toward the Sussex brand, and major partnerships have quietly pulled back. Yet suddenly, in the midst of it all, Meghan's message erupts, suggesting that not only has she been living a lie, but that lie is tied directly to the future of the monarchy itself. Because if Harry isn't the biological father of Archie and Lilibet, what does that mean for royal lineage, titles, and succession rights. What happens when the bloodline itself is questioned? The shockwaves didn't just hit the palace, they hit the entire country. News anchors paused mid-broadcast. Newspapers printed emergency editions. Even loyal supporters of Meghan and Harry found themselves whispering, "What if she's telling the truth?" For years, people accused the British media of hounding Meghan unfairly, of twisting her every move. But now, even her defenders are forced to ask whether the truth had been hiding in plain sight all along. And behind the scenes, it said that the palace's first reaction wasn't outrage, it was fear. Fear that the truth, whatever it is, could expose how much they already knew. Fear that history was repeating itself. Because we've seen this before, haven't we? The secrecy, the forbidden relationships, the royal scandals buried under the guise of duty. The ghosts of the past, Diana's heartbreak, Charles's deception, even the whispers about illegitimate heirs, are all being revived in this new storm. Only this time, it's not a princess seeking freedom, it's a duchess confessing betrayal. But there's something else, something deeper that makes this moment so chilling. The choice of her words. Borrowed. That single word changed everything. It implies arrangement, selection, almost as if the children were part of a plan, a symbol, rather than the natural product of love. It opens doors to horrifying possibilities, surrogacy deals, donor secrets, contracts hidden in private clinics. And if true, it means Harry wasn't just deceived as a husband. He was used as an image, a prop in a narrative that was never real. Still, we have to ask, why now? Why, after years of silence, would Meghan say this? Some insiders believe she's cracking under pressure. Others think she's making a calculated move, a warning to the royals who've reportedly been tightening legal scrutiny around her finances, her deals, and even the status of her children's titles. If she feels cornered, this could be her counterattack, to weaponize truth before the crown can use it against her. But not everyone is convinced. There are whispers that Meghan didn't release this message herself, that it was leaked, that someone close to her, someone who had access to her private recordings, sent it to the press out of revenge. If that's true, then the world might not even know the full context yet, which means the real story could be even worse. Imagine, for a moment, being Harry. Imagine waking up to see headlines that your wife, your partner, the mother of your children, has admitted they're not yours. Imagine the confusion, the rage, the heartbreak. What do you do when your entire life, your entire identity as a father, is suddenly ripped away in a 30-second clip? According to sources close to the couple, Harry hasn't spoken publicly yet. But those who've seen him describe a man broken beyond words. A man who may have realized that the one person he trusted the most has been keeping the one secret he could never forgive. And yet, deep down, you can sense that this isn't just about two people. This is about power, image, control. Meghan's confession didn't just shatter Harry's world. It shook the very institution that has always thrived on controlling the narrative. Because when the truth comes from within, even the palace can't silence it. Still, questions keep mounting. Who are the real biological parents of Archie and Lilibet? Was this part of a surrogacy arrangement gone wrong? Were donors involved? Were the children ever officially born in the UK? Or were the records deliberately sealed to avoid scrutiny? Each question leads to another door, and every door seems to open into a darker hallway of secrets that the monarchy hoped would never be discovered. And then, there's the chilling detail buried in the leaked transcript. At one point, Meghan allegedly says, "Harry was never supposed to know." That one sentence changed the tone of everything. It turned a confession into something more like a revelation of conspiracy. It implies planning, deception, a conscious decision to maintain a lie, not out of fear, but out of necessity. But necessity for what? Power? Protection? Or something far more personal? There's a theory, one that insiders whisper but rarely put in writing, that this confession wasn't about guilt at all. It was about leverage. Meghan knew the royals were tightening their hold, knew public opinion was shifting, and maybe, just maybe, she believed that by releasing, or threatening to release, this information, she could regain control. After all, nothing terrifies the crown more than scandal tied to bloodlines. Because bloodlines are everything. But here's where it gets stranger. The confession didn't come in isolation. Within days, multiple private sources hinted that a related document, something like a sealed record, exists in California, tied to a fertility clinic used by high-profile clients. A clinic that, according to rumors, has connections to both Hollywood and British donors. Could this be the missing piece? The proof of how deep this deception runs? Or is it another layer of misdirection in a game none of us truly understand? Either way, this isn't the kind of scandal that disappears. This is the kind that rewrites history books, the kind that forces even the staunchest royal supporters to pause and ask, what if? Because this time, the lie isn't about money or status or protocol, it's about identity, about who these children really are, and about how far someone would go to maintain the illusion of a royal legacy. As of now, Buckingham Palace remains silent. Their usual strategy of never complain, never explain, has turned into uneasy quiet. And the British press, which once adored Meghan and later vilified her, now finds itself in unfamiliar territory, caught between outrage and disbelief. Even her most vocal defenders, from Hollywood allies to political figures, are reportedly distancing themselves, unsure of what's true anymore. Still, one question lingers louder than all the rest. If Meghan said Harry isn't the father, who is? Who stands behind the curtain of this royal deception? Who is the man she was protecting or hiding from the world? That's the question no one has answered yet. But whispers say the truth is even more shocking than anyone expects. Because the identity of that man might not just shatter Harry's image, it might shake the entire royal establishment. But before we uncover who that man really is, before we pull back the veil on the truth Meghan has tried to hide for years, we must first understand the moment everything started to fall apart. The moment when one message, one confession, turned the royal world upside down and exposed the cracks beneath the crown. Because what came next would change everything. And no one saw it coming. It was just after dawn in London when the first tremors of the story hit the royal communication lines. The phone started buzzing inside Buckingham Palace long before the tabloids caught wind. Something had broken, a leak, a message, a recording, and this time, it wasn't a rumor fabricated by the press. This time, it came from the one person they least expected, Meghan Markle herself. They say the Queen once told her staff, "Nothing stays buried forever." Maybe she was right, because what unfolded that morning sent a chill through every marble hallway of the palace. It began with a message, a voice note that wasn't meant to see daylight. 37 seconds of unfiltered truth that detonated like a bomb inside the royal system. Inside the palace, aides described panic they hadn't seen since the early days of Diana's scandal. Phones slammed down. Whispered conversations erupted in the corridors. One senior official was overheard muttering, "It can't be true. She wouldn't dare." But she had. And within hours, the world would hear it too. Meghan's voice, raw and fragile, filled the room. "They're not his," she said, the words trembling, almost cracking mid-sentence. "They were never his. I never wanted to lie. I just didn't know how to stop." Imagine hearing that for the first time. Not as a tabloid headline, not as gossip, but as a confession from a woman who had built an empire on the illusion of truth. The message spread through encrypted channels before it reached journalists. Palace officials tried desperately to contain it, calling in digital forensics teams to trace the leak. But it was too late. The genie was out of the bottle, and the entire world was about to witness the monarchy's most intimate nightmare. For years, rumors had swirled around the births of Archie Harrison and Lilibet Diana. Rumors of surrogates, falsified records, vanishing hospital staff, and staged photographs. The royal family dismissed them all as wild conspiracy. But Meghan's own words, even without context, reignited every suspicion. One palace insider said later, "It wasn't just the content, it was the tone. You could hear she'd given up pretending." That morning, King Charles was reportedly informed before his tea was even served. The private secretary entered his study, white-faced, carrying a transcript of the message. The king read it twice, then asked, "Is this authentic?" The aide could only nod. Charles didn't shout. He didn't curse. He simply stared out the window of Clarence House, watching the sun rise over London, and said quietly, "So it's true then. She's destroyed him." Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Harry was waking up in Montecito. His phone was already vibrating nonstop. Messages from friends, missed calls from palace staff, a dozen headlines spinning out of control. Meghan's secret message leaked. She says Harry not the father. Archie's paternity in question. Harry, sources say, thought it was a hoax. He laughed until he heard the audio himself. He listened to the clip 3 times. The first time, disbelief. The second, denial. The third, devastation. Then, according to one insider, he threw his phone across the room and shouted, "She wouldn't. She couldn't." But she had. And by the time he calmed down enough to think straight, it was already trending in over 40 countries. The palace immediately went into crisis mode. Senior communications officers met behind closed doors. They debated issuing a statement denying everything. But without knowing the full truth, without understanding how much Meghan had actually said, they couldn't risk it. Silence, for now, was safer than a lie that might be disproved within hours. That silence, however, only fueled the fire. News networks looped the audio repeatedly, their hosts dissecting every tremor in her voice. Psychologists were brought on air to analyze tone and phrasing. "She sounds remorseful," one said. "She sounds manipulative," argued another. The debate wasn't about whether Meghan was lying. It was about what kind of truth she had finally chosen to reveal. And the country? The country went mad. Some said she was courageous, finally exposing what she'd been forced to hide. Others called her vindictive, accusing her of trying to destroy Harry's remaining ties to his family. Public opinion fractured overnight, and even her most loyal fans hesitated to defend her. But the question on everyone's mind was the same. If Harry isn't the father, who is? Inside the palace, the atmosphere grew darker. Old wounds reopened. Whispers about Diana's past resurfaced. Uncomfortable parallels between a mother who rebelled and a daughter-in-law now doing the same. But Charles, seasoned by decades of scandal, knew this one was different. This wasn't about tabloids. This was about lineage. About the very legitimacy of heirs who bore royal titles. At one point, he reportedly turned to his advisors and said, "This isn't just her problem anymore. It's ours." Meanwhile, Meghan's camp scrambled. Her representatives claimed the clip had been taken out of context, part of a private therapy recording that had been manipulated. But when asked to provide the full version, they went silent. The longer they stayed quiet, the louder the scandal grew. In London, courtiers described sleepless nights. William, it said, was livid. "She's not only humiliated my brother," he told a close friend, "she's humiliated the institution." Princess and, ever blunt, reportedly said, "If she's lying, she's finished. If she's telling the truth, we all are." The gravity of that statement wasn't lost on anyone. Because if Meghan was telling the truth, it meant Archie and Lilibet, 2 children officially recognized by the crown, might not belong to the royal bloodline at all. And that would force legal and constitutional ripples the monarchy hadn't faced in centuries. But beyond the politics, there was a personal tragedy unfolding. Imagine Harry sitting alone in that massive Montecito home, realizing his entire life had been built on something he didn't understand. The same man who had renounced his royal role for love, who had stood against his own family to defend his wife, now faced the possibility that the woman he'd risked everything for had never been honest with him. Friends say he went quiet. He didn't want to believe it, one former military friend shared. He just kept saying, "I'll talk to her. There's an explanation." But Meghan didn't answer. For 3 days, she didn't return his calls. Not to deny, not to clarify. Nothing. Just silence. When she finally spoke, it wasn't to Harry. It was through her lawyer, who issued a cryptic statement. "Meghan will not be commenting at this time. Some truths are too complex to fit in headlines." That one sentence sent journalists into overdrive. Too complex? What did that mean? Was it a confession? A defense? A warning? Every interpretation seemed possible, and none brought comfort. Behind palace doors, things were deteriorating quickly. Charles's advisors urged him to convene an emergency family meeting. William refused to attend unless Harry was present. Harry, in turn, refused unless Meghan could join via secure call. Every step forward led to another wall. The once proud family, already fractured, was disintegrating under the weight of a secret they couldn't yet verify, but couldn't ignore either. And then came the first real turning point. A palace aide discovered something hidden in archived correspondence. A confidential memo referencing paternity-related concerns raised years earlier by a private investigator hired unofficially after Archie's birth. The memo had been buried under layers of red tape. Its reappearance now seemed almost prophetic. The memo mentioned inconsistencies in medical records, missing hospital signatures, and a mysterious consultant who had signed off on the delivery without being listed in any official registry. That consultant's name, according to the file, matched one linked to a Los Angeles fertility clinic. When Charles read that memo, his expression reportedly turned cold. "Find her," he said, "and find the truth." By evening, reporters were camped outside Montecito, helicopters circling overhead. Harry finally emerged once, to ask them to leave his children alone. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The children he was defending might not even be his. That night, inside the palace, the family gathered privately. Charles, Camilla, William, and Anne. Tension filled the room. William was furious, pacing. "If we let this go unanswered," he warned, "the public will assume the worst." But Charles, older, wiser, simply shook his head. "You can't fight a confession with denial. We need facts." Camilla sat silently through most of it, sipping tea, until she finally said, "If Meghan's telling the truth, the damage is done. If she's lying, she'll undo herself." It was a cruel but accurate prediction, because while the palace debated, public curiosity turned into obsession. People demanded answers. Royal watchers scoured old footage of Meghan's pregnancies, analyzing every frame for signs of deception. Online forums exploded with theories. Some believed the confession was genuine. Others claimed it was part of an elaborate manipulation, perhaps even revenge for something we hadn't seen yet. And then, just as the frenzy reached its peak, another bombshell dropped. A second clip appeared online, only 12 seconds long, allegedly part of the same recording session. In it, Meghan can be heard saying, "He was supposed to stay anonymous." They all were. Those words sent shockwaves even deeper than the first clip. They all were. Who was they? Were there multiple people involved? Was Meghan referring to donors, surrogates, or accomplices? Suddenly, this wasn't just a paternity issue. It was a potential network of secrets involving powerful people. Every newsroom in the world went on red alert. Analysts began tracing Meghan's known associates, her medical travel history, and her connections to private clinics in Toronto, London, and Los Angeles. Patterns emerged. Coincidences didn't look so coincidental anymore. And while the world hunted for clues, Harry made his move. He boarded a private jet bound for London, unannounced, unescorted. Witnesses said he looked pale, gaunt, sleepless. One photographer claimed he looked like a man walking into battle. When he arrived at Heathrow, the palace dispatched security to bring him directly to Clarence's house. No press, no cameras, just silence. Father and son reunited, not as royals, but as men broken by the same truth. Sources close to the meeting say Charles didn't embrace him. He simply placed the memo on the table and asked, "Is it true?" Harry reportedly replied, "I don't know." For a moment, neither spoke. The weight of centuries pressed down between them. Finally, Charles whispered, "Then we must find out." And that's when it began, the quiet, covert investigation into the truth behind Meghan's words. Files were reopened, staff re-interviewed, private investigators hired discreetly under shell names. The monarchy, an institution built on lineage, was now forced to confront the possibility that its newest heirs weren't royal at all. But before the truth could surface, another unexpected twist was about to emerge, one that would take this scandal from speculation to evidence. Because somewhere, hidden deep within a private archive, there existed a record, an old hospital entry, that would raise more questions than it answered. And what that document revealed next would shake not only the palace, but the very foundation of who Meghan claimed to be. Because the hidden truth about those births was about to come to light, and no one was ready for what it exposed. For years, the story of Meghan Markle's pregnancies was treated as untouchable territory. A royal narrative wrapped in glossy photographs, smiling headlines, and carefully curated moments of supposed authenticity. But when her confession surfaced, that polished facade began to crack. Suddenly, every detail of those two births, the timelines, the secrecy, the missing documentation, was being re-examined under the harshest light imaginable. And what the public began to uncover was unsettling, to say the least. It all started with Archie Harrison's birth in May 2019. The royal household had proudly announced the Duchess of Sussex had gone into labor in the early hours of the morning. The next thing the world knew, Harry was standing in front of cameras, beaming, announcing the arrival of his son from the grounds of Windsor. But within hours, inconsistencies appeared. Reporters noticed that the palace's initial announcement had been issued hours after the supposed birth. Hospital staff who usually provided statements were strangely silent. And even stranger, no one could confirm exactly where Meghan had delivered. Some said it was the Portland Hospital in London. Others whispered about a private residence. But the hospital refused to comment, citing patient confidentiality, and the palace refused to clarify. At the time, most people brushed it off. After all, Meghan had spoken publicly about wanting a private birth experience. She didn't know the world every detail. But now, after her alleged confession that Archie wasn't biologically Harry's, every piece of that puzzle took on new meaning. Because if the birth didn't happen in a hospital, and if the official birth certificate was delayed, altered, or sealed, what was being hidden? Documents later surfaced showing that Archie's birth certificate had been modified a month after it was filed. Meghan's full name, Rachel Meghan Markle, was removed and replaced with Her Royal Highness the Duchess of Sussex. Harry's name and title were also altered. The palace called it a clerical adjustment. But people who understood royal record-keeping knew better. Birth certificates in the royal family are handled with surgical precision. Changes are almost unheard of. So why was this one altered? Royal watchers started digging, tracing back every photo and sighting of Meghan during her pregnancy. There were odd moments. The infamous video clip of her sitting down during an engagement in late 2018, where her stomach appeared to fold unnaturally, like fabric. The way her baby bump seemed to change size dramatically from week to week. The sudden cancellation of public appearances, followed by re-emergence looking either larger or smaller. At the time, these inconsistencies were written off as lighting tricks or wardrobe illusions. But when combined with Meghan's alleged confession, they looked eerily suspicious. And then came the whispers from inside the palace. A mid-level aide, who had since retired, described that period as the strangest pregnancy I've ever seen. They said that Meghan's team operated separately from the royal physicians, insisting on her privacy to an unusual degree. No royal gynecologist was officially involved. No standard medical briefings were ever provided to the press, breaking with royal tradition that had existed since Queen Elizabeth II's time. And when the big day arrived, when the world expected the usual royal birth fanfare outside a hospital, the announcement came instead from Buckingham Palace hours after the fact. No doctors, no nurses, no official witnesses, just Harry, smiling nervously, saying, "It was amazing, absolutely incredible." He looked happy, but also off. There was something in his eyes, a flicker of confusion, maybe even disbelief. The clip has been replayed millions of times since. Now, people can't unsee it. Weeks later, another oddity emerged. Photographers who had been stationed outside the Portland hospital, expecting the usual royal media moment, reported that no motorcade arrived, no security convoy, no visible royal car entering or leaving the premises. It was as if the birth happened in secret, one journalist remarked. And that secrecy didn't make sense, not unless there was something to hide. When Lilibet Diana was born 2 years later, the pattern repeated. Only this time, the secrecy was even thicker. Meghan was in California by then, having stepped away from royal life. The announcement was issued not by the palace, but by her and Harry's personal team. No hospital confirmation, no medical record, no official statement from any American facility. Just a press release claiming she had given birth at Santa Barbara Cottage Hospital, information that couldn't be independently verified. Local reporters who contacted the hospital said the staff could neither confirm nor deny that Meghan had been a patient. Even more suspiciously, the official birth certificate wasn't available to the public for weeks. When it finally appeared, it contained glaring anomalies, missing signatures, and no attending physician listed. And here's where things get stranger. Around that same time, Meghan's former friend and stylist, Jessica Mulroney, posted, and quickly deleted, a cryptic Instagram story that read, "Truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deep you bury it." It stayed up for less than 20 minutes before disappearing. When followers asked what she meant, she offered no explanation. But royal insiders said that post sent shockwaves through Meghan's circle. because Mulroney had been by Meghan's side since the early days in Toronto. If anyone knew what really happened during those pregnancies, it was her. Meanwhile, whispers about private clinics grew louder. One name kept surfacing, a discreet fertility center in Los Angeles known for catering to high-profile clients seeking surrogacy or IVF arrangements. It said that Meghan had visited the facility several times in late 2018, during her first trimester. Officially, it was framed as routine health checkups. Unofficially, insiders claimed those visits were for embryo-related consultations, and the timeline aligned suspiciously well. The clinic's records, though sealed, reportedly listed a special client under a pseudonym with royal protection-level privacy protocols. If true, that would mean Archie's conception didn't happen naturally, and potentially, not even with Harry's DNA. That's a stunning revelation, but it fits the pattern of Meghan's confession. Because when she said the children were borrowed, that single word implied intention. Not accident, not deception born of panic, but design. A planned, deliberate act to construct a family that looked royal, but wasn't. Even the language surrounding Lilibet's birth reflected this odd detachment. In interviews afterward, Meghan never once referred to the birth experience itself. She focused on the blessing of welcoming her daughter, avoiding any details of labor or delivery. In one clip, she smiled thinly and said, "It was a beautiful moment for our family." But when pressed by an interviewer about who was present during the delivery, she hesitated and simply replied, "It was very private." That word again, private. The same word she used every time a topic came too close to something she couldn't explain. And there's one more thread, something that only emerged after journalists began cross-referencing hospital logs. A name appeared in both 2019 and 2021, Dr. Laura Whitby, a fertility consultant affiliated with the Beverly Hills Reproductive Center. Her name doesn't appear on any royal birth record, but financial disclosures filed in California show payments made from one of Meghan's companies to Whitby's medical trust during those same periods. On paper, it looks like routine consultancy fees. But for what? Fertility consultation? Genetic matching? Or something else entirely? To make matters worse, British law at the time required royal births to be witnessed by medical officers, a tradition intended to ensure legitimacy in the line of succession. That requirement wasn't enforced for Meghan. The palace explained it away as modernization, but insiders later admitted that it was Meghan who refused the witnesses. She said it was intrusive, one aide recalled. But the truth is, she didn't want anyone there who wasn't part of her team. By now, patterns had formed that even the most skeptical observers couldn't ignore. The inconsistencies weren't isolated. They were connected, like threads in a tapestry of secrecy. No hospital confirmations, no verified witnesses, modified documents, hidden consultants, private clinics, and now, an open confession that the children were borrowed. What could borrowed really mean? Was it a metaphor for surrogacy? A hint toward donor genetics? Or something even more complex? Some analysts suggest Meghan used the term deliberately, a way to express emotional detachment from the truth without naming it directly. In her mind, perhaps she saw it as a form of protection, for herself, for her children, or even for Harry. But others aren't so forgiving. "It sounds calculated," one royal historian said, like she knew exactly what she was doing, and now she's trying to frame it as victimhood. Meanwhile, the British press began unearthing more inconsistencies. When Meghan announced her first pregnancy, she was already more than 4 months along, despite only recently beginning to show. When she announced her second, she revealed it with a professionally shot photograph, taken remotely by Harry himself. The pose was symbolic, Meghan lying in the grass, cradling her stomach. But analysts noticed something off. The angle made it impossible to see the curve naturally. "It looked staged," said one photographer who examined the image. "Beautifully composed, yes, but contrived." Even the Queen's reaction at the time now seems telling. While she publicly expressed joy at the births, insiders claim she privately raised concerns about documentation. Her Majesty wanted everything done properly, one courtier revealed. But she was advised not to push. The situation was delicate. Delicate. That word now feels like the understatement of the century. Because as all this information resurfaced, the palace's internal investigators found something else, an unexplained gap in the royal archives. Hospital correspondence from 2019 relating to Meghan's medical care was missing, not redacted, gone. Every file that referenced the Duchess's maternity arrangements had vanished. It's like someone wiped them clean, said one staff archivist. You can't even find the logs of who accessed them. That never happens by accident. When investigators attempted to reconstruct timelines, they discovered that several staff members involved in coordinating Meghan's birth plan had since signed non-disclosure agreements and relocated abroad. Two moved to Canada. One, reportedly, to Los Angeles. All declined to comment. So now, the question wasn't just whether Meghan had hidden the truth, but who helped her do it. And that brings us to the most haunting moment of all, the quiet, almost forgotten statement Meghan made during that first post-birth interview. When a reporter asked her, "What was the most special part about becoming a mother?" she paused for a long moment before replying, knowing that it was finally possible. At the time, it sounded like a poetic answer. But now, in light of everything, it sounds like something else entirely. Possible, as in scientifically arranged, as in planned down to the last genetic detail. Every mystery, every inconsistency, every whisper of borrowed children points to one chilling possibility. Archie and Lilibet may have been conceived using methods and individuals outside the royal family's knowledge, and Meghan may have orchestrated it all under the guise of royal motherhood. But even that theory leads to another question. If Harry wasn't the father, who was? Who was the man behind this deception? Who played the unseen role in creating the children who would bear royal titles and inherit royal privileges? That's where the investigation turns next. Because hidden in those clinic records and private correspondences lies a name. One that connects Meghan to someone the palace never wanted the world to suspect. And when that name surfaces, it will change everything. Because the man Meghan couldn't hide any longer is about to be revealed. For weeks after the confession, one name kept surfacing again and again inside confidential palace circles. A name Meghan had spent years trying to bury. It wasn't a royal, not a politician, not a celebrity. It was someone quieter, hidden in the shadows of her pre-royal life. But as investigators pieced together timelines, travel records, and phone metadata, they realized there was a man whose presence seemed to coincide with every major turning point in Meghan's journey from actress to duchess. His name was never meant to reach the public. He wasn't part of the royal script. Yet somehow, his connection to Meghan and to the mysterious births of Archie and Lilibet was undeniable. Let's rewind. Before the palace, before the wedding, before the tiaras and titles, Meghan had a small, tight inner circle in Toronto during her suit's years. Friends, stylists, yoga instructors, and a handful of people who catered to her every need. Among them was a private security consultant, a man known only to a few by his first name, Christopher. Officially, he handled personal protection for multiple high-profile clients. Unofficially, he was the one person Meghan seemed to trust implicitly. He was always around, quietly present at dinners, charity galas, and weekend getaways. There are photos of him standing in the background, his expression unreadable, his distance deliberate. When Meghan moved to London to begin her courtship with Harry, Christopher disappeared from public view. The tabloids assumed he'd been replaced by royal security. But palace staff later confirmed that Meghan had requested her own external consultant to manage her personal safety during the transition, an unusual demand for a woman soon to be protected by the crown itself. And that consultant? Christopher. At the time, nobody thought much of it. But now, in light of the confession, every unexplained appearance of that man began to look like part of a much larger story. Because shortly before Archie's supposed conception date, Meghan made an unannounced trip to Canada. Officially, it was to visit old friends. Unofficially, sources say she met privately with Christopher. The meeting lasted hours. When she returned to the UK, her demeanor changed, calmer, more confident, almost as if something had been resolved. A few months later, she announced her pregnancy. Coincidence? Maybe. But coincidence loses credibility when it happens twice. Because before Lilibet's birth, Meghan reportedly reconnected with Christopher again. This time through encrypted messages traced by investigators to an overseas server registered under his business name. And this time, she wasn't traveling alone. It said that Christopher had left his security work behind by then, running a wellness consultancy, that offered discreet services for elite clients, ranging from emotional coaching to, according to rumors, donor facilitation for fertility cases. No one could ever prove it. But payments made to his company align almost exactly with the months surrounding both births. The pattern was too precise to ignore. When questioned by journalists, Christopher vanished. His social media went dark, his company website erased. Neighbors claimed he moved overseas suddenly. Others whispered that the royal legal team had reached him first. Whatever the truth, he left behind one haunting clue: a photo. The image resurfaced on an old server belonging to a Toronto photographer who once shot promotional stills for Meghan's charity events. In the background of one candid frame, you can see Christopher standing near Meghan, smiling faintly, holding what appears to be a baby shower gift. He's tall, strikingly built, and his features, sharp and symmetrical, bear a resemblance impossible to ignore. His eyes, especially, the same deep-set blue that people would later notice in Archie. It's here that the theory hardened into suspicion. Could this man, the quiet protector from Meghan's past, be the real biological father? Could he be the shadow she's been trying to erase? Investigators dug deeper. Airline logs showed that during the last months of 2018, Meghan and Christopher took multiple flights that never appeared in official royal itineraries. Toronto, Los Angeles, then London, always in close succession. Always just days before major milestones in her pregnancy timeline. One palace source put it bluntly: wherever she said she was, he wasn't far behind. When the first image of baby Archie surfaced, comparisons began almost instantly. "He doesn't look like Harry," some fans murmured online. At the time, those comments were dismissed as rude speculation. But when people rediscovered the old photos of Christopher, those same bright eyes, the angular jaw, the unmistakable grin, the comments didn't seem so cruel anymore. They seemed prophetic. Harry, of course, refused to entertain any talk of resemblance. He defended his family with the same ferocity he'd once used to defend his mother's memory. "Enough of the lies," he told one journalist. "My son is mine." But deep down, even he couldn't silence the doubts. Sources close to him claimed he quietly ordered a private paternity test in 2020, just before the couple's move to California. The results were never made public. But if the rumors are true, that's when the marriage began to crumble. Because the man Meghan couldn't hide anymore wasn't just part of her past. He might have been part of her children's DNA. What's even more chilling is how far Meghan allegedly went to protect that secret. Legal insiders claim that during the final stages of her Netflix deal, one of the clauses she insisted on was editorial control over any material referencing the children's births. That's not typical for celebrity documentaries. But Meghan wasn't protecting her privacy. She was protecting her narrative. And that narrative was starting to fall apart. When confronted by a close confidant, someone who dared to ask her directly about Christopher, Meghan reportedly grew cold. "He helped me when no one else would," she said. "That's all that matters." The friend pressed, asking if helped meant more than emotional support. Meghan's response was a whisper. "Sometimes, help means saving your future." Those words later appeared in the transcript of a confidential interview that never aired. The producers cut the segment, fearing legal repercussions. But leaks from that interview circulated quietly within entertainment circles, convincing many that Christopher wasn't just a footnote in Meghan's story. He was central to it. As speculation intensified, royal investigators began connecting the dots between Christopher's timeline and the mysterious payments linked to Dr. Whitby's fertility clinic. Wire transfers, encrypted communications, and non-disclosure agreements, all bearing the same pattern. Meghan's companies would send funds to a medical trust. The trust would disperse payments to third-party consultants, and within weeks, new staff would appear in Meghan's circle with no official records of employment. It was a maze of transactions designed to obscure any single trail, but the path always led back to one name: Christopher. The irony of it all is painful. The monarchy, with its centuries of lineage control, found itself undone not by scandalous lovers or rebellious princes, but by a secret arrangement between a duchess and a man the palace had never even vetted. Meanwhile, Harry's world was collapsing. Friends who visited him in those months described a man consumed by paranoia. He'd spend hours replaying old videos of Meghan's pregnancies, staring at details no one else would notice. He kept saying, "Look at her eyes. She's hiding something," one confidant revealed. Another said Harry once muttered, "He's still out there, isn't he?" In moments of raw honesty, Harry allegedly admitted to close allies that he didn't know the full truth and that Meghan refused to discuss it. Every attempt at confrontation ended in emotional manipulation, tears, or threats to walk away for good. He was trapped between love, shame, and duty. But secrets have a way of resurfacing. Months after Meghan's confession went public, an anonymous whistleblower sent encrypted files to multiple media outlets. Within those files were private emails between Meghan and Christopher dating back years. The tone was intimate, confiding, often affectionate. In one message, she wrote, "You promised me this would stay between us. You said no one would ever know." Another message, sent weeks before Archie's birth, contained a line that froze everyone who read it. "I can't undo what we did, but I can make it mean something." That line became the headline across global newspapers. What exactly did she mean? What did they do? For the first time, the palace stopped pretending this was tabloid nonsense. Senior aides confirmed they were reviewing all correspondence linked to Meghan's pre-marriage communications. Behind closed doors, lawyers debated how to handle the possibility that royal titles had been granted under false pretenses. If Archie and Lilibet weren't Harry's biological children, it wasn't just a family crisis, it was a constitutional one. And yet, through all the chaos, Meghan maintained her silence. No denials, no clarifications, just silence. Some say she was waiting for the story to fade. Others believe she was preparing to use the truth as leverage. Because if she could prove that the palace had known about Christopher all along and had covered it up, she could turn the scandal back on them. The theory wasn't far-fetched. The royal family has weathered decades of secrets buried under official discretion. But this time, the paper trail was too tangled to erase. The investigators had traced at least one bank transfer from Meghan's California trust to a holding account belonging to a company registered under Christopher's name. The amount? Just under $400,000. Labeled as consultation and logistics. No one could explain what logistics meant. But the timing, mere months before Lilibet's supposed conception, spoke volumes. By now, even the most skeptical palace staff had stopped dismissing the rumors. One insider confided to a journalist, "It's not about if it's true anymore. It's about how much of it is." Meanwhile, the public wanted faces, proof, closure. Paparazzi scoured old archives for images of Christopher. And when side-by-side comparisons with Archie surfaced online, the resemblance went viral. Hashtags like #NotHarrySon and #WhoIsChristopher trended for days. The damage was irreversible. Then came the chilling twist. A private investigator hired by an American network claimed to have located Christopher in Europe, living under a new identity, his appearance slightly altered. He refused interviews, but issued one statement through his lawyer. "I have nothing to say about Meghan Markle or her family. I did what I was asked to do, and I was compensated accordingly." That single sentence sent a shock through Buckingham Palace. Did what I was asked to do. Those words sounded transactional, deliberate, as if the creation of a royal family had been part of a deal. And if that was true, it meant Meghan's so-called borrowed children weren't just a poetic confession, they were literal. But before anyone could verify the investigators' claims, Christopher vanished again. The lawyer stopped responding. The address went dark, and the palace, fearing another media implosion, issued a brief statement reminding the press to respect the privacy of individuals not associated with royal duties. It was the closest they'd come to admitting that Christopher existed. Now, the world waits for proof. DNA, documents, confirmation, anything tangible. But the deeper journalists dig, the clearer it becomes that this wasn't just one woman's secret. It was a coordinated illusion sustained by power, silence, and fear. Because the man Meghan couldn't hide isn't just part of her past. He's the missing piece of the royal puzzle. The one whose existence, if confirmed, could rewrite history and undo everything the monarchy stands for. But even as investigators close in, there's one mystery they haven't yet solved, the one that hides inside the medical files of a private fertility clinic in Los Angeles. Files that, according to multiple insiders, bear signatures not only from Meghan and Christopher, but from a third name neither of them expected to see. And when that name surfaces, It will expose a truth darker than anyone imagined. Because the man behind the delivery room curtain wasn't working alone. And what he left behind is about to open the next chapter of this royal nightmare. That IT begins with a name that wasn't supposed to exist. Not in the records of the Aurelia Institute. Not in the palace archives of Albion. Not in the private correspondence of the Duchess of Varamir. The name appears once, then disappears, as if someone reached into the database with a gloved hand and plucked it out of history. But the ghost of it remained, an imprint, a shadow, a trace that investigators could still feel even when they couldn't see it. They called him the donor. Whispered it like a spell. The man behind the miracle. Or the myth. If you're just joining this story, if you've been hearing the echoes without knowing the tune, here's where the melody turns ominous. Duchess Serafina of Varamir had crafted a carefully controlled narrative around her children, Orion and Alara. The nation believed in the fairy tale. The palace communicated dignity. Prince Alaric of Kentmere, her husband, carried himself with the calm of a future king who trusted the story he was living. But then the confession surfaced. Then the timelines unraveled. Then the quiet man from her past, Cashin Ward, stepped into the frame. And now we arrive at the missing piece that makes everything else snap into place. The vanishing donor. Who was he? Why did he vanish? And what was he promised, so compelling, so dangerous, that he erased himself from the world to keep it? The trail begins inside the Aurelia Institute, a private fertility center tucked into the Apricot Hills outside Solace City, a world away from Albion's Greystone palaces and tradition-bound courts. The institute presents itself like a sanctuary. Copper fountains murmuring in tiled courtyards, glass corridors filled with plants and light, doctors who talk like therapists and therapists who speak like philosophers. A place where those with money go to buy hope. A place designed to never admit that hope comes with a receipt. The palace never announced Serafina's connection to Aurelia. Why would they? Royals don't shop for miracles. Miracles, historically, were supposed to find them. Yet payments from a Varamir charitable trust ripple through Aurelia's ledgers, never labeled with her name, never direct, but unmistakable once you follow the shell accounts. The transaction descriptors are almost poetic. Consultation, logistics, wellness support. Behind each soft word, a hard truth. It's here that Dr. Mara Whitfield enters the story. Mara is Aurelia's serene face, the softly spoken director with a vault of degrees and a talent for telling anxious people what they need to hear. Her signature appears on intake forms for a client using the pseudonym Lady V, anonymized, encrypted, shielded by a private family office in Kentmere. On paper, Lady V is no one. In reality, she's the most watched woman in Albion. And in that quiet convergence of secrecy and spectacle, the donor enters. Candidate 873L. 873L. That's how they say it in meetings. Not a man, not the father, not even the donor. It's a string of numbers and a letter, a tag you'd give a parcel you're sure will arrive on time. Except parcels don't have histories. Parcels don't make choices. Parcels don't change their minds. The first thing investigators notice about 873L is that he does not fit Aurelia's standard donor profiles. There are no school transcripts on file, no fitness summaries, no family medical histories beyond a generic, no known hereditary diseases. For a clinic that boasts about precision, this is chaos disguised as order. What the file does contain is stranger. A scanned page with half the lines blacked out, a notarized signature, and a handwritten sentence at the bottom. I understand that this arrangement requires my complete and permanent anonymity. The handwriting tilts left, as if the writer was in a hurry. Or afraid. Afraid of whom? The next clue isn't in the clinic at all. It's in a side office 2 floors up from the legal department, where a junior compliance officer keeps a private spreadsheet. Dates, initials, cross-references that help reconcile invoices with outcomes. She created it to keep her sanity. She printed it because she didn't trust the system not to eat it. She tucked it under a tea tray the day an audit swept through the building and never brought it back out. Months later, when a whistleblower with a conscience and too much insomnia meets an investigative producer in a silent parking garage, the spreadsheet appears like evidence pulled out of a dream. It has 9 columns. In column 7, vendor/external, someone typed L.Ren, 3 consults, 873, L, Payment cleared. L. Ren. Not a full name. Just the first initial and a surname that sounds more like a bird than a man. But in this world, a name is a door. And once you've found a door, you start looking for the key. Who is L. Ren? The Aurelia Institute won't confirm. Dr. Whitfield won't comment. Lady V does not, cannot, exist officially. But money leaves a trail even when people don't. A payment from a Kentmere-adjacent family office in Albion moves to a Solace City escrow. From escrow, it moves to a boutique consultancy called Halcyon Field. Halcyon's invoice lists 3 services: genetic consultation, profile screening, and logistics of discrete transfer. Logistics again. That soft word covering hard actions. Halcyon Field has only 2 public-facing employees. Neither is named Ren. But the firm rents a back office in a building owned by a man whose last name is, in fact, Ren. His first name is Lysander. Lysander Ren isn't a doctor. He isn't a scientist. He isn't, strictly speaking, anything you can casually name. He's a facilitator. The kind of person wealthy families call when they want something difficult done quietly. He has a face nobody remembers and a network that remembers everything. He places art in free ports, heirs in foreign schools, problems in containers that somehow never get scanned. If you need discretion, you call a lawyer. If you need invisibility, you call someone like him. What, exactly, did Lysander facilitate? To answer that, you have to look at 3 threads that run through Serafina's story like dark seams: timing, proximity, and motive. Timing first. The payments to Halcyon Field align with 3 key months. The whispered conception windows for Orion and Alara, and the brief pause between those windows when Serafina disappeared from public view under the guise of restorative retreat. Each time, the same pattern repeats. Funds move. Emails switch to encrypted. The Duchess's schedule empties without explanation. And Cashin Ward, Serafina's longtime consultant, appears in cities that he has no public reason to visit. Proximity next. After the second set of payments clears, Lysander's building access logs show late-night entries by a M. Whitfield, cross-checked by plate recognition in the underground garage. She is not alone. A tall man enters 15 minutes before her, leaves 3 minutes after she does, and never uses the elevator. He is not on staff. He wears a cap and walks like a man who never expects a door to be locked. The camera's infrared bleaches his face into a luminous blur, details erased by light itself. But in the reflection of a glass directory outside the lift, you catch the edge of a profile. There is a resemblance that can't be proven and can't be ignored. Cashin. The reflection is too small to convict, too suggestive to dismiss. And motive. What did Serafina need that Albion's tradition would never permit? Control. Over narrative. Over lineage. Over the only thing the crown insists it can manage: blood. If you cannot negotiate with history, you engineer it. If you cannot inherit legitimacy, you manufacture it. But engineering requires parts, and parts require vendors. And vendors leave invoices that even the best family offices sometimes mislabel. Who, then, is 873L? Here is the cruelest answer of all. He may be no one we will ever meet. He may be a composite, a profile stitched from an array of donors screened to resemble a future no one questioned until it was too late. Or he may be someone very specific, someone who entered the system with a name and exited as a code, someone who signed a document for money and woke months later to find his body had become an abstraction in a palace's silent war. The story turns again when a junior barrister in Albion receives a thin packet in the post with no return address. Inside is a photocopy of a notarized contract from Halcyon Field. The recipient thinks it's a prank at first, too dramatic to be real. The letterhead is faint, as if it's been copied through carbon. But the terms are unmistakable. Donors shall agree to permanent anonymity, waive any claim on resulting issue, and accept that any discovery of identity will trigger an automatic penalty equaling 5 times the original compensation. It is not the penalty that shocks the barrister. It is the clause that follows. In the event of a claim, donors shall also agree to amend past social records to ensure non-association with any parties listed herein. Amend past social records. As if the past itself were a ledger you could balance, an account you could scrub. This is how you make a person vanish. You incentivize their absence. But vanishing leaves emptiness. And emptiness draws questions. Serafina's questions grew into secrets. Alaric's questions collapsed into silence. The people around them adopted the tone that institutions always adopt in the face of unexplainable facts. They called it complicated, then called it private, then called it done. It was none of those things. It was a transaction, dressed in the robes of destiny. There is a moment midway through the investigation when Alaric's private secretary meets with a retired archivist, a woman with sharp eyes and a memory that files names like glass slides. The secretary lays out material from the Aurelia Institute, sets down the spreadsheet showing Wren's name, and asks if the archivist recognizes it. She does not hesitate. "He's the man the old houses call when they get nervous," she says. "When an heir is a liability. When a debt has a panic attack. When a wedding promises more than the blood can pay." The secretary asks for proof. The archivist smiles sadly. "People like him are proof. But you know what you know. If you want something more tangible, consider this." 3 months after Orion's birth, a small grant foundation in Solace City awards a 6-figure innovation stipend to an entity called Wren Conservancy. The paperwork lists a mission to preserve and protect migratory songbird populations.